Our protagonist is Anthony, a young man passionate about urban history and abandoned places. Anthony works as a night watchman in an old, long-closed theater. He took this job to explore the building and find hidden artifacts of the past, hoping to write a book about the forgotten corners of the city. On his first day, Anthony noticed that the building looked more ominous and mysterious than he expected. The old poster, peeling paint, and creaky floors created a sinister atmosphere. Anthony began his first night shift with a slight feeling of unease, but also with the anticipation of adventure. The theater building, immersed in silence and darkness, seemed to hold its secrets deep inside. At the beginning of the shift, everything went smoothly. Anthony checked all the rooms, doors, and windows, making sure everything was locked. Taking a flashlight with him, he decided to explore the building a bit. When the clock struck midnight, Anthony heard a strange rustling sound coming from the hall. At first, he thought it was the wind or rats, but the sound repeated, becoming louder and clearer. He decided to check what was happening and headed towards the stage. His footsteps echoed through the empty hall, and his heart began to beat faster. Approaching the stage, Anthony saw a faint light flickering on it. He climbed onto the stage and discovered old props covered in dust and mirrors reflecting shadows. Suddenly, the light began to intensify, and a ghostly figure appeared before him. It was a woman in an old-fashioned dress, with a pale face and empty eyes. She began to slowly move towards Anthony, emitting a piercing whisper. Anthony recoiled and ran away, but the shadows began to move, following him. He hid in one of the dressing rooms, trying to catch his breath and understand what was happening. Suddenly, the dressing room doors slammed shut by themselves, and the light flickered. Anthony heard crying and a creaky voice telling him to leave this place. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. Gathering his courage, Anthony decided to find out what kind of ghost was haunting him. He began searching the old theater archives, hoping to find answers. In one of the dusty boxes, he found a diary that recorded the story of an actress who disappeared many years ago. Her spirit, as it turned out, was bound to this place because of a tragic love and betrayal. Anthony realized that the actress couldn't leave the theater due to a curse placed on her. He decided to help her free her spirit. With each step moving through the corridors of the theater, Anthony encountered increasingly terrifying visions. Screams, knocks, shadows trying to grab him. All of this was part of the nightmare that had become a reality. Finally, Anthony found an old stage where a box of the actress's personal belongings was hidden. Her spirit appeared before him, and as Anthony illuminated the box, he saw ghostly chains begin to break. The actress softly whispered words of gratitude and slowly faded away. Anthony left the old theater at dawn, exhausted but relieved. He knew he had helped a restless soul find peace. When he turned to say goodbye, he saw the first rays of the sun illuminate the building, and it no longer seemed so sinister. Since then, the theater never looked so menacing again, and the spirits seemed to have left it alone. Anthony returned home and decided to write a book about his adventures. He knew that people would read it with bated breath, as such stories leave no one indifferent. Our protagonist, James, is a 30-year-old man who works as a journalist in a big city. His life is filled with hustle, deadlines, and constant stress. James has always dreamed of adventures and unusual stories that could become the basis for his articles. He never believed in mysticism and the supernatural, but was always open to new experiences. One day, James receives an assignment to write an article about forgotten railway routes. He decides to investigate an old line rumored to be abandoned and cursed. James finds information about the last night train that supposedly runs on this line once a year on the night of the full moon. The old railway, covered in moss and rust, leads deep into forests and mountains, where no one has tread for a long time. The journalist decides this is a perfect opportunity for an article and heads to the station on the appointed night. The station looks abandoned and forgotten by time. James feels a slight unease, but his curiosity outweighs his fear. At midnight, James notices the light of an approaching train. It's an old steam locomotive surrounded by smoke and sparks, looking as though it has come from another era. The train stops, and the doors of the carriages open with a dull creak. James gathers his courage and boards one of the carriages. Inside the train, a sinister silence reigns, and only dim lighting reveals the old wooden seats and dusty windows. James notices a few passengers in the carriage besides him. They look strange, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces pale and expressionless. He tries to start a conversation but receives only silence and empty stares in response. James decides they just don't want to talk and focuses on his notes. But with each hour, the journey becomes more ominous. Soon, James begins to notice strange things. The time on his watch seems to have stopped, and outside the windows, there is no movement, only endless darkness. The passengers behave increasingly oddly. Some of them start to disappear and reappear as if out of nowhere. James feels growing tension and a cold that chills him to the bone. In one of the carriages, he finds an old book with stories about people who disappeared on this train. The stories are eerily similar. They all embarked on a journey but never returned. James realizes these are not just rumors. The train is truly cursed. He decides he must get off at the next stop, but the train doesn't stop. James tries to find the conductor or engineer to ask when the next stop will be. He wanders through the train, looking into every carriage, but finds no one. Suddenly, he sees a ghostly figure at the far end of a carriage. It disappears as soon as James tries to approach. He starts to understand the train is inhabited by ghosts. James recalls hearing the legend of how this train was cursed. It is said that many years ago, the train's engineer committed a terrible crime, dooming the train and all its passengers to eternal wandering. Every year they appear on this night to take new travelers on their ghostly journey. James realizes he must find a way to stop the train or leave it, otherwise he will remain there forever. He decides to return to his carriage and try to contact the outside world. But his phone doesn't work, and all attempts to get the passengers' attention fail. They continue to sit, silent and motionless, like puppets. James begins to lose hope. He remembers everything he learned about the train and realizes the only way to break the curse is to find and neutralize the artifact that binds the souls to this place. He starts searching every corner of the train, looking into closets, under seats, and even in the luggage compartments. In one of the abandoned carriages, James finds an old trunk. He opens it and sees an ancient iron box inside. Inside the box is a small figurine of a locomotive crafted with incredible detail. James feels this is the artifact. He decides to destroy it, but as soon as he touches the figurine, the carriage starts to shake and light appears outside the window. The train suddenly stops and the carriage doors open. James realizes he has a chance to leave. He jumps out of the carriage and finds himself at a deserted station surrounded by forest. The station looks exactly like it did at the beginning of his journey, but now it feels more real. James glances back and sees the train start to disappear, dissolving into the mist. He hears the ghosts' voices thanking him for freeing them. James feels relief but also understands he needs to leave this place immediately. He finds his way to the nearest town and decides to write his article, telling the story of the night train and its curse. A few days later, James's article is published and sparks great interest. Many readers write to him, sharing their stories and legends about the night train. James realizes his adventure is just beginning, and that many new mystical stories lie ahead. James returns to his normal life, but the memory of the night train lingers. He decides to continue exploring mystical and abandoned places to uncover their secrets and write about them. His articles become popular, and he gains recognition as one of the best journalists in the paranormal field. The story of the night train becomes one of his most famous works. This experience forever changes his life, teaching him that the scariest stories can be the most meaningful.